Progressive firebrand Rashida Tlaib defeated Brenda Jones in the primary race for Michigan's 13th congressional district on Tuesday. Following the win, Tlaib thanked campaign volunteers and wasted no time telling supporters that, quote, "Our country is ready for someone like me," and others that are saying enough with corporate greed, enough with the assaults on families.
Huffpost political reporter Danielle Marans joins us now to discuss how Tlaib's victory in Michigan this week differed from her win in 2018. Great to see you, Danielle.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
First question right off the bat. Are we seeing the second wave of the squad right now? Is this the squad 2.0?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been a really interesting primary season. Obviously, the sort of activist progressive left was very disappointed in the results of the presidential primary. But here, as sort of the season has gone on, there have been a number of wins, some of them very unexpected, ousting incumbents. Obviously, Jamal Bowman taking out Elliot Engel in New York. We saw Cori Bush taking out Lacey Clay in Missouri. And Rashida Tlaib, who really only won with a 1.900 vote plurality of something like 31 or 32% in 2018, a field with 6 candidates, just absolutely curb stomped the person who she had narrowly edged in 2018. It was something like 2/3 of the vote went to her. This again in a majority black district in Detroit, where people had really said that John Conyers' seat belonged to the black community in many ways. He was obviously a key figure in the civil rights movement and a long-standing liberal jurisprudence force. But I think it's fair to say that there's a new cohort. I think if we were comparing it to the right and sort of the Tea Party revolution, they still probably have more room to demonstrate their clout in order to sort of call the shots within the party. But if we were talking about, let's say, 15 or 16 or 17 or 18 votes that it would require for a cohesive left bloc to threaten to block legislation that it did not like in the House, this brings them a little bit closer to that goal, and certainly it's got incumbents thinking, looking over their shoulder, and that could certainly change dynamics as well. Obviously, there were some open seats where left-wing candidates won too, such as Mondaire Jones in the New York City suburbs.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And talk a little bit about Cori Bush's win, because, okay, you have AOC. She's the initial shockwave where people go, what, we didn't see this coming whatsoever. He's been there forever, and she comes out of nowhere is able to beat him. But then they kind of rationalize it as like, okay, but that's like in New York City, and it was a district that was becoming more diverse, and she had a better identity fit for the district. And you could kind of make that same case too with Jamal Bowman and Elliot Engel. Okay, once again they beat the old white guy. Okay, we get it. Cori Bush is a very different dynamic here. So talk about some of those unique dimensions of that race and the message that it could send to other Democratic incumbents.
I have to tell you, I was talking to Missouri Democrats, national Democrats in the days before the election. They said, this is going to be close, but I just do not see Cori Bush pulling it out. And that's for the reasons that you mentioned. There was no demographic upheaval dynamic here. This was not a plurality or majority minority district represented by a white person. Frankly, the city of St. Louis and its inner ring suburbs are not subject to kind of the gentrifying forces of, let's say, Northwest Queens, where AOC's base really is. But at the end of the day, I was sort of picking up frequency waves about Cori Bush a month and a half ago, and her fundraising was starting to pick up. And I think what really happened was a couple different things. First of all, she did, this is her second time around. She established some base level of name recognition. She was featured in the interim between her first run in 2018 and her second run in a Netflix documentary, Knock Down the House, that also obviously prominently featured AOC's win. And so that also upped her name recognition. And she literally has been involved in politics thanks to the Ferguson protests and been one of the most active members of sort of that Black Lives Matter origin story. And so when the Black Lives Matter movement ticked up once again in late May and early June, it just made her involvement that much more important, that much more prominent. I think in general, there's an anti-incumbent mood out there in many of these districts. And I think in Lacey Clay's district in particular, there is a sense that this is a guy who was there for 20 years. His father served there from 1969 to 2001. So he picked it up from his father. The seat's been in the family since 1969. His father was, again, a civil rights leader. But Lacy Clay was kind of seen like, forgive me, but a fail son, a guy who had really rode his father's coattails, who was known to be a little bit dirty. I started to dig into his finances. I couldn't prove anything for certain, but year after year, competitive election or not, he was sending hundreds of thousands of dollars to his sister's law firm, which is really just his sister, through his campaign. Perfectly legal on its face and hard to prove anything unethical because you're allowed to hire family members for campaigns as long as you pay them a market rate. But what in the end I think actually happened was, rather than just raise issues with voters about his ethics or corruption, it wasted his money. And in the final 2 weeks, but especially the final week, he was being outspent by Cori Bush on the television airwaves, a very unusual position for an incumbent. And of course, just as Democrats very quietly spent $150,000 on her behalf on the air, and an anti-monopoly group, it's called Fight Corporate Monopolies, but it's really about corporate power, also spent $100,000 blasting him for opposing the Obama administration's fiduciary rule, which required financial advisors to give advice in the best interests of their clients. He's a huge corporate PAC money recipient. In the end, when we look at the results, we see that Cori Bush in 2018 actually did best in some of the liberal white precincts of the district. This time, she really closed the gap significantly in predominantly African-American neighborhoods in the poor and working class precincts of North St. Louis and the inner ring suburbs.
Interesting.
You said something important earlier, which is that it gets to the actual impact that candidates like this will be able to have. They're getting closer to assembling a coalition that could block legislation they don't like, which reminds me so much of what happened after the Tea Party wave when the Freedom Caucus was able to assemble itself. Are we going to see a leftist squad version of the Freedom Caucus? Do you think that's the end goal with this wave of, really authentic progressives winning these primaries against more establishment figures?
I think it's tough. We've seen a couple moments this past year, whether it was on border spending, defense spending, COVID relief, where 3 or 5 or 4 or 5 of these members, sometimes it's the squad plus Ro Khanna in California, will vote against a bill that not even the leadership of the Progressive Caucus is willing to vote against. I think what should be interesting to see is when you add in Mondaire Jones, when you add in Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, whether this group is willing to flex its muscles a little bit further and not just defy Speaker Pelosi, but also defy frankly, Pramila Jayapal, who has really taken an approach of trying to make things better from the inside by not pissing Pelosi off too much, and is widely rumored to want Pelosi's chair, though I think that is extremely unlikely. But that's certainly an awkward position for a would-be opposition faction leader to be in. So I think that there are outside forces like Justice Democrats. There are individual people like the squad members themselves who want to create this force. But, some of those folks are also a little bit loyal to Pramila Jayapal. And I think it's interesting to see how Jayapal's strategy changes. I think, some of the key tests here will be if there is a unified Democratic federal government, or even if there's a divided one with a Democratic House, what will austerity look like? Because we're looking down the barrel at probably spending cuts of some kinds, even under a Joe Biden presidency. We had it under Obama, and in many respects, he pivoted to deficit reduction pretty quickly. And I think many progressives believe that was disastrous for local economies, for some of the most vulnerable people, create an entire generation of people that are incapable of starting families and buying homes. And this issue, the related issue of evictions and foreclosures. And so if they are able to say, we're going to withhold support, and on a partisan, the key is a partisan bill, right? Because if Republicans are going to vote for something anyway, then they have less power. But if the House needs every single Democratic vote, for example, to pass a major stimulus in the first year of a Biden administration, or a major effort to do something else related to the economic overhaul, to me, that will be the real test. These ambitious proposals that they and other progressive members support, they're still 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line from even being on the table and ready for consideration. So that's what I'm going to be looking for.
Interesting. Sounds like Pramila Jayapal is kind of the Elizabeth Warren of the situation. Fascinating insight, Dan. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
All right. Great being here, as always.
Next on Rising, the housing market is split into two realities: eager buyers looking to move to the suburbs and those who are losing their homes, getting kicked out of their apartments. Author of Homewreckers, Aaron Glantz, is going to dig in on the housing crisis when Rising returns.